All right, so that's me. Okay, presentation over. What we're going to do today is something a little bit different. Who was here for the Agile Ready Depth? I think most people were through that. So instead of rehashing the same ground, we're actually going to do things a little different and get you to set the agenda. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a short 20-30 seconds to think up questions around Agile that you want to know. Then ask them. I'm going to stick them into OneNote and use that as the guide for how we're going to do things. I hope you're thinking. I'll take questions from everyone except Mitch. And what you're going to have is you're going to have 3 votes. So I'll give you 3 votes. Basically, you can use those votes any way you want. You can put them all on one question, or you can spread them around. And the questions with the highest number of votes are going to be the ones I tackle first. So that what we do is we get a presentation that meets most people's needs and gives you the best values, which is what Agile is all about, right? Giving value to the customer, setting priorities. So this is the Agile presentation. And I'm ready to go. So first question, sorry, I just should ask, who needs an intro on what Agile is? Does anyone not know what I'm talking about? Excellent. All right, cool. So take a few seconds, take a breath, as long as it takes to eat a slice of pizza, and chuck some questions at me and I'll stick them in and we'll go from there. Anyone? Bueller? No? Oh, all right, Mitch, come on, out with one.
How do you estimate the number of items that fit in the first iteration?
Okay, how do we want items in first iteration? I really can't type standing up like this, but that's all right.
Can the development team be agile when the enterprise remains waterfall?
Ooh. Can a team be agile in a traditional environment? Is that the best way to put it? Is that all right?
Yes.
Okay. You can choke, it's okay. Other questions?
How do you make a business case in an iterative development model? Like a business case for an overall, I guess, program report?
Okay, so we're talking about...
Because you're iterating through, so you don't know what the full scope of work is up front.
Yeah, I had a similar question around...
So we're talking about... You're talking about trying to get an end line?
So sort of try to get a bit of a ballpark estimate out of something when you don't know what the ballpark necessarily is up front.
Okay, estimating the unknown target.
Yeah, that's not right.
Is that reasonable? So we don't...
When a customer comes back to you and says, what's going to be the total cost?
Okay, so upfront estimating... We're talking about fixed cost effectively, right? Would that be fair?
Which is everybody's expectation.
Yeah. But it's fixed cost. Fixed cost, fixed time, fixed budget, fixed scope, fixed everything. Except quality. No, quality's not. Everything's fixed and we're just miracle workers. Other questions? Come on, there's more than that. Come on, you've got the evil grin there.
It's going to be a short break.
Example of how a calculated runtime?
All right.
What do you see as the biggest shortcomings of Agile?
Biggest shortcomings of Agile. All right, that's good.
What level of documentation, or how much documentation do you need before you start?
How much doco before we start?
How much will you end up with?
Okay. Someone else?
How do you pick a good Agile team member?
Sorry?
How do you pick a good Agile team member?
Have you got a hat and some names? How do you pick a good Agile team member? So we're really talking about qualities of the person you want.
Yeah.
Related to that, how do you choose an Agile methodology?
Okay, which methodology? methodology to use. Okay. A few others. All right. Is that enough? It's probably enough. A few minutes. All right. So we need to figure out which questions are the most important. So have you got your 3 votes ready? Don't go cheating and having 4 votes. Not that I'm actually counting or auditing anyone, but you know, we'll see how we go. All right, so what I want you to do is just stick your hands up, 1 hand per vote. So if you want to do 2 votes for a question, stick both up. If you want to do 3, stand up, okay? No one will do 3 now, I've just made sure. All right, so first one, estimating the number of items we're going to get done the first iteration. Hands, 1. All right. Don't worry, Mitch, it's okay. Can a team be agile? How many hands for this one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. All right. Next one. Estimating the unknown. 1, 2, 3. Okay, hang on. 9. Okay. Good. Why is that one over there? Who knows? Upfront estimate fixed costs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Do I hear 7? Alright. Calculating burn downs. Okay. Bigger shortcomings. 1. Don't feel bad. Just because no one likes your question. It's okay. How much doco? 1, 2. There's a half hand. Oh, 3, 4. Okay, we got the 4. Okay. How pick good team agile member? Yoda. How to pick a good team? 1, 2, 3. Cool. All right. And which methodology to use? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. All right. So this is really tough how we do this. Let's get this in priority order. Doink.
I've got another question. Why don't you use Excel?
Sorry, I'm a bit deaf in one ear there, mate. Alright, 6. We got a 4 up here. We got a 5. And just get that. Alright, we'll move the 3 up here. And we'll move the 0 down. Alright, there we go. 1 product backlog or equivalent. Okay, so obviously we haven't really expanded on the requirements, and this is a 30-minute talk, so it's going to be quite condensed, but as an example, and if you want to get fancy, you could use TFS, you could use Excel, or you could use my favourite thing, which is a bit of wall and some post-it notes to move things around until you nut it out, and then you record it later. Alright. How long is this going to take to get through? How much do you think we're going to get through? I've started the first question, by the way. We're estimating the unknown target. We've actually got a target, but we've got 20 minutes roughly to do this. So how much are we going to get through?
Allocate a period of time.
All right, so what, we're going to look at our first question, see how long our first question takes to answer. Is that going to be indicative of how much time it takes to answer the other questions?
You've got to size them. You've got to size them.
Okay, so if we size them small, medium and large, looking at that, which one's the small, medium and large? Tough. One of the things that you've kind of touched on it anyway, in terms of the first thing, before you even worry about what you're putting in that in your entire target or the unknown that you're going to get to, is just try and firstly nut out what's involved. You know, we had, when we started this presentation, an unknown target. We didn't know how many questions we were going to get. So the first thing we did was try and elicit some of that from the stakeholders. So you're the stakeholders effectively, so we're trying to get that out of you. Now that we've kind of got a rough idea, we could go and then size these up. So we've prioritised them, we size them up. So estimating the unknown target, we might say, is 5 points. Where a point is unitless, doesn't really matter, it's just an indicator. And then all the other questions are relative to that. One of the mistakes you'll find a lot of teams make is to estimate in ideal days, or they just talk about, well, this item will take 3 days to do, this will take 12 days, this will take 2 days. all that sort of stuff. And they're thinking in their head, that's if I had 8 hours a day and I didn't have any interruptions and I didn't have any hiccups or anything like that. The problem is, you talk about days, your customer hears days and your customer immediately goes, all right, 12 plus 5 plus 2 plus 7 is whatever it happens to be, because I've already can't add up 4 numbers, it's too late in the day. And then 28 days later the zombies come out and we've got no product and lots of undead walking around. Sorry, you see, it is late in the day. But effectively doing that sizing up front and talking about things in points, the customer doesn't think about ideal days anymore. They want to get a handle on it and they want to understand the amount of work involved. But if you say, we did a previous project around a similar sort of thing, and it depends if you've got history. So if you've got no history at all, you've got to take a different approach. But if you've done an agile project before and you've used points before and you're using the same technology stack, so there's not too many unknowns, and your team is roughly similar to the team who did a previous project, you can take the point sizes and how long it took to get through each point from a previous project and apply it as a rough guide to the next one. The saying, the best indicator of tomorrow's weather is today's. It's the same with projects if you've got the same team, same technology stack. If you've never done an agile project before, the first thing you do in terms of estimating your unknown targets, you've got to take a spike. You've got to take an initial cut at what's involved. So let's say we've got a project where we might have something out here and it starts getting really nebulous in terms of the end requirement. But you kind of have a decent idea of what's going to need to be done in that first hit. If you take that and do, say, a week on it and try and nut out what's involved and get a feel for how long things will take, you can take that and then apply it to all the requirements that the customer's dreamed up. And obviously the more nebulous ones, like I want the ESP interface where I just think about things to be done and the system just does it for me, you estimate with a really large point size. So that way you've got these big chunky items way out the end, but the customer knows there's also a massive amount of uncertainty in that, and you can progress from there. I don't know if I'm answering the question quite right. So, clarification? Nope. Alright, so in a nutshell, have a crack at doing it and spend a little time to try and get a feel for it first and go from there. And in terms of a backlog, keep nebulous items fairly nebulous. Don't try and break down items into smaller subtasks that might help you get a better idea of it. If it's a long way in the future, just let it come when it comes. Estimate and deal with what's current and worry about the rest, if that makes sense. Alright, how long is this project going to take? Yeah. And you've got to give an answer off the bat without even being able to do a spike task, for instance.
Just say you do that. You then go and break down the later tasks.
Yep.
Into required details.
I mean, you're kind of talking about this third item, the upfront estimating the fixed cost. They're fairly related as these two items. So the unknown target and the fixed cost. The way you do fixed cost, how do you do it in a normal project? You lick your finger, you hold it up in the air, see which way the wind's blowing, and then you add 100%. 200%. Sorry, not enough fudge factor. 300. Okay, not true. In a traditional environment, you still try and get a handle on what's involved, right? You have a look at the requirements and you try and figure out using function point analysis or all that sort of stuff to try and get a handle on it. It's effectively the same as what you're doing with an agile project. You're trying to get a handle on the amount of work involved by the number of function points, story points, relative sizing. The more, the theory being with function points, the more functions there are in a requirement, the more time is going to be required to deliver it, right? Same with an agile situation. You've got a use case or user story, whichever way you're working, a requirement, you try and get a size on it, a handle on it, so you have a think about what's involved. Is this going to be bigger or smaller than another item I've estimated? End up with a certain number of points, regardless of which method you use. With traditional ones, you've already got that history though of how long it takes to get through function points, roughly. You know it's not accurate, but it's a rough guide. Yesterday's weather, today's weather, that sort of thing. Same theory applies when you're doing fixed cost. It doesn't matter how you're going to deliver it. You've still got to have that initial run through of what the requirements are, how much work's roughly involved, and then apply whatever your risk factor is and everything else to that to get an approximate size. Because you're never going to tell the customer, well, I calculated 400 points, therefore it's going to be exactly 200 days or whatever it is. You're going to say, well, internally you'll go, okay, it's roughly 400 points, that means it's going to be roughly this length of time plus my risk factor, because you know it's already a project that's going to take more than 6 months, so I've got a different risk factor depending on duration.
There's much benefit in trying to educate the customer as to the workings of this. I don't know there would be value in it, but do you think that it's...
Alright, hang on, we're going to have a little bit of scope creep here. Is it worth educating customers? Anyone interested in that one? Hands up, come on.
Stakeholder buying.
Yeah.
And we can't reorder that into one consideration.
I just did my spike task, you know, so my spike iteration's finished. How long did that take, by the way?
6 months.
Okay, so how long's the rest of the presentation going to take?
14.
So how much of this am I getting through?
We're going to have to cut scope.
We are. We're going to have to, I'm not going to get through all these questions.
Drops the quality.
Drops the quality. Thank you. All right. Okay, is it worth educating customers? The quick answer is absolutely yes, every time. Reason being, you want more customer involvement. If you don't educate your customers about why you're doing Agile, they're not going to buy into the process. They're not going to want to be involved. They're not going to feel as if there's anything in it for them to be part of the development process, to be involved in requirements, explanation each time an iteration starts, to go through reprioritizing and dropping dropping specs and adding new specs and shuffling things around, unless they understand what's in it for them. So yes, you might do a fixed price contract and you might estimate it's 9 months worth of work. Guarantee in that 9 months the customer's going to want to change scope. Guarantee. It's like death in taxes, customers change scope. How you handle that, if you've educated the customer, they're going to be more open to keeping a timeline fixed and being flexible on scope than they are on trying to keep scope fixed and time fixed at the expense of quality and doing a half-assed job because we're just too rushed. If you ask a customer what do they value more, base requirements at high quality or the wish list at average quality, which way do you think they're going to go?
I find that whenever I try to explain it to someone, even something where they're internally in IT,
Yep.
I don't want to hear it.
Yeah, but the contract says,
Yeah, look, if you're in a...
They say, oh,
just get it done.
yeah.
Yeah.
What are you bothering me with this for? That's what it's like.
It's a lot better than it was 3 years ago. Yeah, that's the whole thing with education. It takes time. How long did it take Australians to be skin cancer aware?
Are they?
Exactly. Or smoking. I mean, I know I'm picking things that are a little bit different than software, but you think about it, skin cancer and smoking are life-threatening if you're not paying attention. You know, everyone wants to die with a big, massive lung cancer happening or big melanoma hanging out the back of their head or something like that. I'm sure they do, right? No, but we still go out and get ourselves sunburnt and people still go out and buy a pack of smokes. But through education, things take time and they're slowly changing. It's going to be the same with Agile. We've got 30, 40 years of traditional failing development methodologies to unlearn. People aren't going to just magically switch overnight. Not everyone gets it straight away.
Being able to say, here's where it was successful, here's an example of where it was successful.
Yeah. All right, so can a team be agile in a traditional environment? What do you think? Absolutely they can. No, but even yeah, well, yes. You're not going to do it. The team's not going to do it if their team lead isn't part of it, obviously. You know, but it really comes down to the team leads to make this work. You know, you can still run smaller. You're pretty much stuck with smaller projects, but you can run smaller projects in traditional environments using agile. Running a large project in a traditional environment will only work if they've already learnt by doing a lot of smaller ones and learnt the mistakes themselves and learnt what works for their organisation and what doesn't. So there you go. Cutting quality there, am I? Is that all right? Doesn't mean it's not a lot of hard work, by the way. In fact, in a traditional environment, you've got a lot of, if you're the piggy in the middle, basically the guy running the agile team trying to report to people in a non-traditional sense, you've got to know how to translate things from the agile type of tracking into the Gantt charts and all that sort of stuff, and MS project and everything else. Which methodology to use? I don't care. Don't go cowboy, that's not a methodology. I think we established that last time. XP, extreme programming, is not something I would recommend first up because of the word extreme. It's quite intense. Scrum's a pretty good one in terms of what most people will adopt first up because it is such a lightweight process. It doesn't dictate your engineering practices. It says this is how you manage stuff, this is how you run a project, how you actually do the daily work of cutting code and testing it is up to you. So you take what suits your team. So depending on your environment and what your team's used to, you work in various things and you concentrate first on getting the communication aspects in place and how you manage the project and go from there. You could try using Crystal Clear, that's another methodology which can also work. It's fairly intense in terms of your interactions with people, very communication focused. So it just depends on the team. How much doco before you start? How much do you create during the project? All right, the little joke was none during the project. Not true. Might seem to be true. You'll hear people talking about my agile team doesn't create any documentation. Well, if you find those people, just slap them silly and tell them to wake up. How much do you need before you start? How much do you need to be able to do your estimates and get a sizing of the work involved? If you've got good buy-in from the customer and your stakeholders, you can actually do it fairly light in terms of documentation. Get your requirements, document your requirements, make sure you've got those down, make sure you've got them at least in story cards, if not use cases and things like that at certain levels. But it really does depend on your environment and what's required. So if you've got a situation where you've got to have a big set of white papers around what the project's going to be doing and why we're doing it and what the ROI is and all that sort of stuff, which is valid stuff, you need to make sure those are done. You've still got what the business requires from you. In terms of what your team requires understanding of what the functionality is we're trying to deliver and why we're trying to deliver it. A team that's trying to deliver something without understanding why will typically deliver it wrong. Having that in some sort of documentation is handy, but too much detail and most devs and most team members won't read it. They'll tell you, yeah, I'll read it. Ask them in 6 months' time once the project's delivered, did you ever read that documentation? Answer will be no. Unless they're completely bored and they wanted some way to get themselves to sleep at night. Might sound glib, but it's the way people work. Does that answer the question?
So what sort of documentation would you generate during a project?
During a project, whatever is needed by the team. So I'd be looking at keeping our architecture up to date so that if you've got new people coming in, they can keep on top of that. discussions around requirements, if you do use cases, I'd recommend doing those properly, doing the Cockburn style of use cases, just because a user story is a great starting point for conversation about a function or about a requirement. But it typically only deals with what the need is and what the UAT criteria are to make it accepted. It doesn't deal with the what-if situations. So I have a requirement that says system must be able to handle a transaction properly. And the UAT, the acceptance criteria is the transactions recorded in the database and we get notification or something like that. What are the failure conditions? How do we deal with failure? You typically only figure that out through a use case, right? Because you've got to have all the alternate flows and things like that. So doing that's quite handy. You can do it in a wiki, you can do it in Word, you can do it in Excel if you can figure out how to use Excel as a documentation tool. You could do it in OneNote.
But wireframes.
Wireframes and Visio are very good in terms of UI layouts. Thank you for prompting me.
So that's the only documentation we have in our project, really.
Oh yeah, we got that in the architecture stuff. In traditional documents in terms of functional specs, you get someone trying to describe a screen using words and saying that this text box needs to be positioned at coordinate 12x and 42y and all that sort of stuff, which is kind of a bit crazy. If you take Visio, you do a mock-up of roughly what the screen looks like and then let the devs figure out exact placement and CSSs and for web app and all that sort of stuff. Come back. Hello, screensaver. There we go. Then that gives them something to talk about. The other advantage of doing the wireframes is you've got something you can talk to with the customer. So the customer wants to know what the thing's going to look like. First thing they ask, not how's it going to work, what's it going to look like? You can use a mock-up in Visio, or if you've got a tablet PC and you're good at drawing, you can draw one up. But it gives you a talking point and helps you figure out requirements. So if you've got a requirement that says the transaction has to be completed, hello, then you use that as the talking point. So this is how a transaction is looking. These are roughly the fields we're going to be capturing and go from there. Fair enough? Questions? Okay. One last one. This is probably the last one we'll get to. So who was good at their estimates, by the way? Did you pick 5 questions? No. All right. How to pick a good agile team member. You really want to look for certain qualities. Qualities being pragmatism more than anything else. So if you've got someone who's very rigid thinking and needs to follow a described process and doesn't necessarily do well dealing with uncertainty, they're going to have trouble adapting to it. Pure and simple. They're not going to enjoy an environment where things are able to be changed fairly rapidly. It's just not going to happen. Those sort of people like to know that for the next 6 months I'm going to be working on this little piece of requirement, and this is the way I do it, and this is how I step from one phase to the next phase to the next phase to the next. That's fine. Someone who can cope a bit more with dealing with uncertainty and deals well, communicates well, very important, need to be able to communicate, is the sort of person you want on the team. Hopefully that's everyone in the room. Hands up if you're not. No, I'm joking. Alright, so that's it. Any last questions before I go?
Do you think it requires more discipline, but like personal discipline in Agile, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely needs a bit more discipline. Because you've got a bit more change going on, a bit more freedom, you need to be disciplined about controlling scope during an iteration from a project perspective. The devs need to be disciplined in terms of keeping up to date with communication, and your testers and your BAs and everyone else involved, your DBA. That coordination aspect of who's doing what and when and all that sort of stuff is really where it comes to it. So if you're not that disciplined and you start doing things off on your own, someone else is going to come in and look at your code potentially and not have a clue what you're doing. It's going to cause friction. Some of the people want to do unit tests, some don't. Some want to do curly braces this way, others want to do it that way. You know, I don't care. You know, as long as you all do it the same way and you all stick to it as a team, and you're disciplined in your approach and you're pragmatic in your approach, should be good. Now I know there's a lot more we didn't cover. You know, we didn't cover how we do release planning. We didn't cover how we do some of the project stuff. Very quickly though, I just want to have, even though I've got 0 votes, I just want to show you one thing in terms of burn downs and managing projects. So I talked last time a little bit about, I'll just make that a bit bigger. Can you see that okay? In terms of managing scope, how you manage scope in a project is quite important, especially with fixed term engagements. You want to finish on a certain date and time. So what we're looking at here is basically the scope we had based in the number of points at the start of the project. We did our first iteration, we got through a certain amount of functionality. We got through 30 points or whatever it is. We didn't have any increase in scope. Next iteration we got through another chunk of work, but we had an increase. So each time there's an increase in scope, we're pushing the bottom of the bar below the line. What we're doing now is we're tracking how fast we're getting through our scope in terms of the number of points, so that's our velocity. But we're also tracking how much functionality the customer's adding during each iteration. So we're tracking scope increase at the same rate. I've seen projects where the velocity can't keep up with the scope. So you actually have the lines diverging. If you see that situation, you've got something to talk about with the customer. Very gently, very politely. Stop it! At the same time, what you do by doing this is you show the customer visually in a single piece of paper how much money they're costing themselves by changing scope and not reducing scope that they originally had. Alternatively, you can look at it a different way and have a burn-up chart. So how much functionality have we completed towards our end goal, if our end goal is a bit clearer. Each time we add scope, we push the line up. If we keep time the same, you know how much we're going to miss by, so we have to keep pushing time out. So if we increase scope, we need to take something out if we're going to keep this end point the same. Make sense? So that's kind of the project management aspects of it. We touched on it very briefly, even though no one asked, except Wendy. All right, and just in conclusion, oops, all right, where was I? That's me. This is RDN, we all know that sort of stuff. Thank you very much.